I'm not trying to come to terms. I'm in no way at all trying to find a place of negotiated settlement. And this is a thing a Christian should find out too. We're not trying to find common grounds with the people I disagree with. I want them in their camp, and I want to identify them. And I want to be in my camp, and I want to be identified. And I want everybody to see when they look at me and know what camp I'm in. And I don't want an enemy that I don't want camp he's in. A lot of these people say, can you be a Christian with long hair on? I don't know what camp you're in. I want to know where you're at. I want to know whether to stand with you or against you. It's a trouble. Everybody wants to be in the middle of the fence. It's like the soldier put on a blue coat in the Civil War and gray pants. Decided to be in the middle of the road. He got shot in the rear end from one direction and in the chest from the other. I think you're safer with one uniform on or the other, rather than going and having both of them on. Nobody trusts you then. Everybody wants to get on that fence, and so nobody can identify who you are. I want to be identified. That's where I can stand up and do the slugging, you see. I'm going to conclude, and we're going to have a little refreshments, and that is on this chart. This is the communist thrust in this nation. This is the socialist thrust. This is the illegal arm. It breaks the law. This is the legal arm. It makes Marxism legal. This is the revolutionary arm. It goes out in the streets. This is the evolutionary arm. It passes the laws in degrees and converts slowly one into the other, a republic into an oligarchy. This is the overt arm, the one you're to see out in the open. This is the covert arm, the one you're not to see. This is the decoy, the one you're to believe is the real thrust. This is the real attack. This is only the feint. This is the excuse for this thrust to take power. Prove it. This group constantly gives money to all the revolutionary organizations. This group gives money to the communists overseas. This group supports the schools teaching Marxism and communism and revolution in this country. This group has aided every single communist takeover in the world. I claim, when I get that far, that maybe they're not that dumb. Maybe they're cunningly brilliant. This is the anarchy arm. This is the democracy arm. It does it in the name of legality and takes its power by the ancient fraud of democracy, which is always a fraud where one clique is rigging the deal and promoting the immoral by financing immoral acts, subsidizing them, and giving welfare checks for laziness, for dishonesty, for breeding illegitimate children. For every immoral act is subsidized, and every moral thing is taxed. Why are they attacking Bob Jones University? We've never led a revolution against the government. We've never burned a flag. We don't have any dope takers. We aren't having any alcoholics. Why are they at war with our university? Very simple. We're at war with them. And if you're not at war with them, then you won't have any troubles. Why do they attack the Birch Society so much? It's at war with them. If the Birch Society was wrong, they would ignore it. Who would attack the Birch Society that says there's a conspiracy if there was no conspiracy? Non-conspirators wouldn't even care. And if there were no conspirators, there would be no conspirators to care. Who would write and foment all the attacks on the Birch Society for saying there's a conspiracy unless there was one? The one thing you can be sure of, if you say there's a conspiracy and you get attacked, you're right. You prove your point. And this is the key. Until you understand that one head is running two arms that are working together, but appearing to fight each other, but never do, then you know somebody is trying to fool somebody. The very wealthy and powerful people traveling around the world to the communist nations entertaining and supporting the communist operations and the violence in the street, supporting the schools, turning out the revolutionaries with their foundation money, the people who are financing the big wheels in our government, the people who seem to be in the key organizations, and they, remember, are not Americans. They're internationalists. They're the jet set. They have no loyalty to any certain nation. Their wealth and their properties are worldwide. Their interests are worldwide. And if your interests are worldwide, you need a worldwide government to control your monopoly interest. Just like you need a local government to control your local monopoly, you need a world government to control world monopolies. That's why Rockefeller put up the money for the United Nations property. Huh? Ever figure that out? That's why they finance schools like Columbia and the education system. This is why they put money into the National Council of Churches. This is why a couple of years ago they put out, I was just driving along the street, and here's a radio program, talks about a study made by Princeton University in the causes of racism in the United States. Do you know what the conclusion of this study was? Racism is centered in the fundamental churches. The fundamentalist, conservative Christian churches. At the end of the program, they said, this study was financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. I knew it was going to be. Princeton University was a Christian school, financed and paid for by Christians to train preachers of the gospel. Harvard was a school financed by Christians for training preachers of the gospel. Practically all of the great heathen atheist schools of this country were Christian schools where Satan used God's money to finance his program. And notice what they attack. Where's the enemy? Oh, those awful Christians. Isn't that funny? Well, it says it should be. Let's have some fun. Some things to do. And before we do it, I think there's some few little things I'm going to have to mention. You see, this little clique of people want to run shows. First thing is, if I want to play God, I want to control and run things, don't I? This is the important thing. And if I've come up with a conclusion, and these people have, I suggest reading this book, The Naked Capitalist, again, to show you what their very basic idea is. Their idea, and they establish this very clear, was that the aristocracy of old could not maintain itself in the 20th century. It would have to do it by economic power. It could not maintain itself on bloodlines as it had in the earlier days. And in order to do this, it was going to have to rule the world. In order to set up a world aristocracy, the two greatest tools laying around were a thing called socialism and communism, because they promoted the idea of powerful governments. If you could own and control those movements, they could be used for the purpose of maintaining and creating your aristocracy. Only the aristocracy couldn't be called that anymore. Now it's called a jet set and other sorts of things, and the social elite, but they're basically an aristocracy. They do not run under the bloodlines. Now, here's for an example. Last month's American Opinion, I believe the one with the fireman on the front here, had as its lead article, no, it was a month before, I guess, called Think Tanks. We have a series now of elite demagogues who are sitting around in think tanks, that is, hiring supposedly experts and specialists to come up with all sorts of programs of controlling society. For an example, here's just one of them. The way this thing operates, they go around to different professors, supposedly experts in different fields, and they're going to investigate some area. In this study was called On the Possibility and Desirability of Peace. What they do is they go and they talk to these professors, and they say, look, you have been selected for a very special study. Now, our study, you will receive an airline ticket every once in a while. Take the ticket, go wherever it is, you'll be picked up by somebody, and you'll meet certain people where an agenda will be given to you. Now, you have unlimited money, that is unlimited use of computer capacity, whatever your expenses are, there's no question about that. And we are to study the question under consideration, but there's only one rule. No moral consideration is to enter your thinking. You are to be purely objective and pragmatic. All right? Here's the question. Whether we should ever have peace again. Interesting. Here was the only dissenter. He put out this article without putting his name on it in Esquire magazine 4 years ago. 4 or 5 years ago. Big long article, runs on for page after page. And he talks about how they worked this out with psychologists, sociologists, economists, and all the other boys. The conclusion of this committee was that war in the past has been inefficiently handled. That is, the idea of having, you see, one of the things that happened was Hitler didn't go right. The Second World War did not go according to the script. Hitler was supposed to be opposed in Russia, and they gave Hitler the impression, by very definite information, that Russia's army was only half the size it really was. When Hitler went into Russia, he was supposed to be checked at the borders in a long, dragged-out war in Poland. What happened was, when Hitler's armies moved into Russia, they were welcomed as liberators. People surrendered by the millions. 3 armies laid down their weapons in the first couple days, and the German army rolled without opposition and being hailed as liberators. And something went wrong with the plans. So a man like Heinrich Himmler, former and present communist, and the head of German Gestapo, the head of the German SS were both communists. The head of German intelligence was a communist. In fact, Hermann Goering, or not Hermann Goering, Goebbels was a communist. The only one who was not a communist of the whole crew was Goering. That's the one who is most aligned and maligned, isn't it? He was the only really legitimate German. That is, he was out for Germany. He was never an indoctrinator leftist. But the rest of the boys were. This is why the SS moved immediately into Russia and started the atrocities. Why? It wasn't until the SS moved in under a communist, and Hess was a communist who's still locked up in England, isn't he? 25 years later, nobody can talk to him. Rudolf Hess. Why? He's the boy that knows the show. You don't want to have him blabbing around, do you? Read a book by Prince Michael Sturza of Romania called The Suicide of Europe. He was the ambassador of Romania and the foreign minister of Romania. He'll tell you what the show was in the 1930s in Europe. Diametrically opposite of everything you were given in a history book. That is, in your mythology books. Now, here Hitler was supposed to be checked at the borders, and he started sweeping across Russia, and they had a terrible thing happen. It wasn't going according to the script. That's why the atrocities had to come, and why we had to actually be forced into war early. We had to stop Hitler in Russia, because the guy was supposed to go so far for an excuse of war, but no more. The war was not supposed to get as big as it got, and Hitler ended up to be a bigger thing than they figured on. After all, there's only one little country of Germany and all of Europe. I mean, he was outnumbered 20-1, and he was winning. And that's why they had to turn on him. He was all right as long as he did what he's supposed to according to script. Anyway, the Second World War and invasion in Poland was not created by Germany. The condition was created by England, who negotiated the invasion by telling Poland that England and France would die to the last man for Polish liberty. Then when Poland was invaded and were told that they were to stand up to Hitler and not even negotiate or even discuss things in which the Polish had already agreed to, and England and France earlier, that is, that Germany had a right to cross the Danzig corridor. Though they had all agreed to it, all of a sudden they shut the Danzig corridor and forced Germany to war, because Germany could not get to Prussia. And with the Russian army mobilized on the other side, Germany had to have access to Prussia and could not have one, because the Polish army resisted it. Anyway, our history books neglect one thing. Poland was not invaded by Germany in 1939. It was invaded by Germany and a sweet ally called Russia. Germany was evil, but Russia was noble for the same invasion, which is interesting, isn't it? Kind of depends on who's who, isn't it? So we had a little condition there, and the war, they had to then turn on Hitler much stronger than they expected. Back here, I was going somewhere and I forgot where I was going, but anyway. Well, maybe we went as far as we wanted to go. Today is the 195th anniversary of the founding of the Illuminati. This is the day that is celebrated by all socialists and communists, by Amtrak, and always has been celebrated by the communists. They tell us that the date is because of May Day in Russia in 1917. Interesting that the communist and socialist movements of the world were celebrating in the 1880s and 1870s May Day. May Day is far older than any 1917. You go back to the May Day parades. May Day parades are an old thing. The date comes from 1776, and the May Day celebration of the Maypole was created for a certain purpose. May Day is always the big day to the Marxists, and the Marxists didn't start with Marx. Back in 1776, on May 1st, a man named Adam Weishaupt founded an order of the Illuminati in Ingolstadt University in Bavaria. This man created an order which was a religious order, and what this order was made of, I have here the advertisement for the Imperium of Sovereignty of Mysteries, the Brotherhood of the Illuminati, the Orders of the Illuminati, the Pre-Nicene Church, the Order of the True Rosy Cross, the Pan-Sophic Rite of Masonry, the United Rites of Memphis and Mizraim, the Order of Martiniz, and the Civic Order of Saint Raphael. Now, this order and its suborders, the Jacobins were one of the Illuminati orders, the ones who pulled off the French Revolution, had certain beliefs. Page 1 we find the law of evolution. And they go through the law of evolution as they have it. Now this is all mystic in the mysteries. What they claim is this, that J of N, that's Jesus of Nazareth, came here to tell man how to be free of the law. That is, how to become God. How? By giving and overthrowing all of the things that enslave man. Religion, morality, tradition, and historic law. That man, if he used his pure reason, would find out that he would be born again into a higher order by crucifying his older self and a demigod, master of men, that he already was God. And he became God by only the realization of that. This is to be illuminated, to understand that by our reason, we ourselves are divine. Isn't that a nice religion? And seeing we are divine, those people who arrive at this level of knowledge, the fully illuminated, are the elite that will rule the cattle of the world. There are those who are not born again and are of the slave mentality, who believe in religion, morality, tradition, and law. And there are us elite who understand the higher truth. Isn't that beauty? He founded this religion called the Illuminati. Marx and Engels were illuminated. A whole series of Illuminati. One of the members of the Illuminati, of the original Illuminati, was a man named Birch. Birch was the founder of an order called the League of Just and the League of Just Men, which Marx and Engels were members of. And Marx, the manifesto was nothing but a rewrite of Adam Weishaupt's concepts of 1776 applied to the Industrial Revolution. Just like David Ricardo, economic text was a rewrite or attempt of it of Adam Smith's 1776 book on economics, applying it to the Industrial Revolution. 1776 was quite a year. The Wealth of Nations was published, the Illuminati was founded, and the Declaration of Independence was issued. A very historical year in the time of man. Anyway, this organization pulled off a thing called the French Revolution. What it said was this, that man, to be truly free, had to overthrow these things and would create a one-world organization. And we would do this by spreading a myth, that is, that man could live with liberty, fraternity, and equality. Now, the idea of liberty, fraternity, and equality to any intelligent man is self-contradictory, as all terms are that they use. That is, if we are to be equal, we can only be equal by being enslaved. Men in natural form are not equal in anything. Free men are never equal. Brotherhood, Free men are not brothers. Man is not a brother. Christianity, the Bible says men are not brothers. Does it? It says those who accept Jesus Christ are brothers because they're children of God, and all those who reject Christ are children of the devil. And who are brothers? People with the same father. If I have a different father than you, we can't be brothers. The Bible says there's two brotherhoods. They said there's only one. What? The children of the devil. That's why atheism is a religion. And they say this is pure Christianity. No, it's the old Gnosticism, come right out of the 1st century A.D. It's the same old thing that took over the Christian church in 325 in Rome and turned it over to the state. It's not new. It's the old jargon. Anyway, here they're going to become God. Fraternity, that is, we're all brothers. We're not all brothers. They'll come out with other things. They'll say God says, we are our brother's keeper. Genesis doesn't say that. That's one of the reasons I became a Christian. I started having to read the Bible to defend myself in these debates. It says, Cain, a murderer, asked God, am I my brother's keeper? God never said that. Cain, a murderer, said that. And it was a question, not a statement. And God did not punish him for not being his brother's keeper. He says, the blood of your brother's in the ground. You're your brother's murderer. You're trying to cover it up. You're a liar, a rebel, and a murderer. And that's why he punished Cain. We're all God's children. The Bible disagrees with that. But notice, they will say this as if it was scriptural, won't they? Thou shalt not kill. The Bible commands capital punishment. On the very same mountain that the 10 Commandments were given. God commands that. In the same Bible that the 10 Commandments are. How can you quote one and not quote the other? Because the truth was not in them. Anyway, this Illuminati formed in several different branches, many different branches. The Jacobins and hundreds of such societies in France led a revolution. All of these were made up of elite. There were no poor people in it, no working class, no peasants, no downtrodden. They were the wealthy, the aristocracy, the elite that led the revolution. The middle class had their head on the block. As the mobs were turned loose, creating absolute anarchy to bring about a member of the Illuminati, a man named Napoleon Bonaparte, to power in France, who wasn't even a Frenchman, which is interesting. We then had a war that crossed all of Europe with a blockade put on Europe and a special embargo so that nobody could trade with Europe except the Rothschilds, who moved across England with Nathan Rothschild in England, shipping at monopoly prices onto the continent because of the continental policy of Napoleon and the blockade of England. In 1815, Nathan Rothschild bought England. He bought the government. He created a bond crash on the day of the Battle of Waterloo. And the market fell some 99% in one day on British bonds, as Rothschild was selling as a panic on the market. And everybody tried to sell and dump because Rothschild obviously knew what was happening, and he had his own secret agents buying the bonds at a penny and a half, and $1. And then the news arrived when he owned the British debt that Wellington had won at Waterloo. And he bought England. Then we had Louis Rothschild, his brother, over in France in 1820, by the French government. When the King of France was negotiating a new loan after the battle with Napoleon, was safely put away. On the day he was negotiating a loan, Louis Rothschild arrives in the anteroom, sits out there, twiddling his thumbs, while the people rushed in to tell the king that the French Birch had just crashed. And the king comes out and bows to Louis Rothschild, who walks in and finances the French government. Solomon Rothschild goes down to Austria and to Vienna and finances a man named Metternich, who controlled the Holy Roman Empire, which is neither holy nor Roman nor empire. But Solomon Rothschild became the financier and the kingpin behind the emperor's government. A man, the oldest son, Esmail, operating in Germany on Frankfurt, picked out a nice young count who was ambitious, named Count Otto von Bismarck, and financed his rise to power as the Iron Chancellor that put Germany together just 100 years ago this year. Germany's only 100 years old, you know, as a nation. Most people don't realize that. This is their first centennial. We think of Germany as an old country. It's not. It was a whole bunch of little principalities. The Iron Chancellor wielded it together. And Otto von Bismarck said in 1850 that his bosses had decided to split the United States up because it needed to have competition in order to be able to threaten the United States and this country by threatening with war. They couldn't threaten it with war from Europe in wooden ships. And in 1860, we found the conspirators, the same anarchy conspiracy going together. An Illuminati organization in this country with the same address, headquarters in England as the Illuminati in England, was called the Knights of the Golden Circle. Had some interesting members. General Beauregard, the man who opened fire on Fort Sumter. Benjamin Judah, the treasurer of the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. We find the Confederates being controlled at the time by an organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle that had 20,000 members. No little outfit. By the way, also the Secretary of the Union was a member of the same organization. The Secretary of War was a member of the same organization in the Union. Also, Lehman Brothers and was a member of the major financier of the Union. We had a war between two members of the same club. What was the purpose? They told you the purpose, and Lincoln understood it. They figured Lincoln was kind of a bumpkin. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but Lincoln figured out. They were divided up in a bunch of small nations so they could threaten each other with war forever. You see, the United States had no natural enemy. Canada? No. Mexico? No. Cuba? No. Europe? Too far away. In those days, no threat. The United States was immune from external threat. It had to be put under the threat control system. By the way, Kalman Rothschild, I didn't mention, opened his bank in Naples. By 1842, had the Vatican so much in debt, he forced the Pope to invite him to the Vatican and feed him kosher in public. That's quite a little deal. You can't beat that, can you? Anyway, they sent over in 1837, we had a bank crash as the bankers in this country withdrew their money from the market, and we had a bank panic. Later, we were told it was wildcat bankers out in Indiana did it. Oh, no. It was in New York that the bank crash happened, and a man arrived from the home office of Rothschild here in this country with unlimited money to become our first unofficial Federal Reserve. His name was August Belmont. The Belmont Stakes are named after him. He had a sub-lieutenant and a banking house which was controlled by the Rothschilds, another operation in this country called the House of Morgan, J.P. Morgan Company, with Rothschild money. Anyway, at Frankfurt is where also the Warburg Bank is, where Paul Warburg, the former president of the Federal Reserve, came from, and one of the authors of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Anyway, these boys came over here with an idea of taking over our money supply. The first idea was to try it with war, and they had divided the country into three parts and ready to divide it into four. That is, Virginia seceded separately in its own nation. Lee was not a Confederate general. He was a general of the Army of Virginia, a separate nation, which was not part of the Confederacy. The rest of the Confederacy had seceded, but Texas and Louisiana had made it clear that when the war was over, they were going to go separate, which would be a fourth nation. In 1858, there was rebellion on the West Coast. California was going to go separate. They had the gold, and they were separated 2,000 miles from the rest of the country anyway. That would be a fifth nation. Then they envisioned the Midwest would break away from the Atlantic states, which would make a sixth nation, and eventually New England from the Central Atlantic states, and you would have 7 little countries to pit against each other in the same little game they had been playing in Europe for thousands of years. The problem was Lincoln had figured it out. He didn't fight the war to free the slaves. He said he didn't care whether they were freed or not. If they could be freed, fine. If they weren't freed, that's all right too. What did he fight the war for? And he made it quite clear. To preserve the Union, and for no other reason. One was obvious, particularly when Russia, the only country in Europe without a Rothschild bank, came to Lincoln's aid in 1863 by sending the Imperial Baltic Fleet into New York Harbor to stop the England's invasion of Canada. England was setting her troops up in Canada for invasion of New York. And also France had moved her army into Mexico and took it over and put Maximilian on the throne and had the French army on the Rio Grande. And in 1863, the plans called for a simultaneous attack by the Confederacy in the Mississippi, France across the Rio Grande, England across the St. Lawrence, and the Army of Virginia across the Potomac in a 4-way pincer movement on the Union. But Russia's Navy arrived in New York City at the critical moment. And England didn't like the odds of fighting the Russian fleet when the Russian fleet could be based and operating only at a couple hundred miles, while the English fleet had operated 3,000 miles in the days of wooden ships and take 7-8 days to get across the ocean or more than that. It's a bad thing because you can't supply. And England withdrew, and France decided not to go it alone, and finally when the war was over, Lincoln told France to get out. And they packed up and got out because he had the biggest army in the world at the time. Once the Confederacy had surrendered, Lincoln commanded the biggest army the world had ever known, the most powerful army. And he dictated the terms. They gunned him down, and they gunned down the Tsar of Russia, who sent the Russian fleet. Interesting as a sidelight, the Russian fleet was built by the British on a Lend-Lease program. Shows you how stupid Lend-Lease programs are. Anyway, and by the way, the Tsar of Russia was shot down too by a Marxist anarchist. Oh, another member of the Knights of Golden Circle was a married man named John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth assassination was planned in Canada. He escaped to Italy, where he died, according to his granddaughter, Zola Forrester, in her book in 1937, which you will not find in your library. This one mad act, the unknown story of John Wilkes Booth. She claims that her grandfather died in 1879 while exiled in Italy. He died a wealthy man. By the way, all of the co-conspirators arrested supposedly with John Wilkes Booth, that is his landlady and etc., were tried and hung. Well, after arrest, their heads were locked in a leather hood. They could not even speak to their jailers. They were tried and not able to speak. What they had to say was never known to the world. They were taken to the gallows, still locked in their leather hoods, and hung. Did they know too much? When the Secretary of War told General Grant not to go to the Ford Theater when he was invited by the President of the United States, this is in Grant's own memoirs, is interesting, isn't it? Lincoln had thwarted the club, and they didn't like it. So they started another attack. They were pushing through the central bank, but it wasn't going. And by the way, a man was elected at the turn of the century who was diametrically opposed to a central bank named William McKinley, the last real president the United States ever had, and probably one of the finest men who ever took office of the presidency in the history of this country. A personal man, William McKinley, was an outstanding paragon of virtue. They gunned him down at Niagara Falls. And the central bank got pushed and kept getting defeated in Congress because the people didn't like the idea of a central bank. Then they came up with a brilliant idea. We'll build 12 buildings controlled by one board of governors and call it a decentralized central bank. They sold that little game, didn't they? Then they pulled another little game. Watch this show. Once they got the Federal Reserve Bank through, first they had U.S. dollars. Then they started issuing a few Federal Reserve notes. Then they got used to that, didn't they? Then in 1919, they flooded the country with Federal Reserve notes, creating a fantastic inflation. Farmers and businessmen went out and borrowed money at inflationary prices in order to take advantage of the new higher prices. Then when they all got nicely mortgaged, they pulled the money in, and we had a crash in 21 and 22, a tremendous depression with massive unemployment. They picked up the mortgages of the farms, and they picked up General Motors from Will Durant. The DuPonts took over, seized it in a matter of 6 months' time. They almost got Ford Motor Company at the time. There was great havoc. Then in 1923, they started a new game. Oh, this is a beauty. They increased from 1923 to 1928, in the next 5 years, the amount of money lent on stocks by 500%. Stock prices soared as the Federal Reserve poured money behind the stock market, and prices went up and up and up. Then, in the spring of 1929, the big bankers in New York and of Europe met in the south of France at Marseille. And after that meeting, a person like Bernard Baruch, the man who financed Woodrow Wilson's campaign for the presidency and who became head of war production under Woodrow Wilson during his First World War and made over $400 million of personal profits by putting war contracts through his own company. He put $1,800 million worth of contracts in his own companies. He made money by the war, you know, to make the world safe for democracy and all that sort of stuff, see? What they promised Woodrow Wilson, who was an idealist, they promised Woodrow Wilson that he'd be the architect of democracy. That is, he would be the molder of the new world government. That is, he would be the first president of the world in the League of Nations. They promised him what Satan promised Jesus on the mountain. And Woodrow Wilson didn't give the same answer Christ gave. They promised him he would be ruler of the world, the first president, the architect of democracy. He used those own terms himself, didn't he? We're going to have this League of Nations, and you will be the leader of the world government. Roosevelt was offered the same thing. We're going to have a United Nations. Russia's destroyed. It was in the Second World War. France was destroyed. It was. England was destroyed. It was. Germany's destroyed. It was. Italy was destroyed. It was. Japan is destroyed. China is destroyed. There was only one nation in 1945 in the world that countered anything. It was the United States. More powerful than all the world combined. And you would be the president of that, and we're going to have a League of the United Nations, and you'll be the first president of the world. Me? Yes, you, Franklin. You know, it's amazing what happens when you offer a man great honors. There's many Christian preachers fallen for that same thing, haven't they? And they've gone down the line against every principle because they were offered big names. Their names spread on radio and television. They'd get movies. They would be given honor to the president. They would be sitting at political conferences. That they would be wheeling with the big wheels of the world, and he'd be called the greatest evangelist of our time. I couldn't resist that. I couldn't resist that because I think the man is saved. The problem is with the man is that he's preaching himself. He wants to build himself. And whenever we do that, we got a problem. Watch a man that is promoting himself. It's a dangerous thing. I want to give you just a little background of Billy Graham for a few minutes while we're on the subject. I saw a couple of people walk out that bothered me a little bit. They knew what I was talking about. And they say, why do you oppose Billy Graham? I'll tell you why. The Bible says that we are not to be and be on platforms with people who hold a doctrine other than we do. He takes a man like Bishop Pike, who denies everything in the Bible and says, this is my man. Bishop Pike, will you lead us in prayer? Now, the Bible says if he does that, we are to treat him as we would Bishop Pike. That's what the Bible says. He was a member. He has a doctor's degree from Bob Jones University, an honorary degree. His song leader is Dr. Bob's old song leader. Dr. Bob, who led 500,000 to the Lord by the time he was 40 years old. One of the greatest evangelists, and Dr. Bob Jones probably talked to more people face to face than any man in the history of the world, as far as we know. Any other person, anybody exceeded him would be Billy Sunday. Maybe the only other man that is in question of Dr. Bob. And Dr. Bob told him then, he said, Billy, the Lord needs a man. There's a promise. You will go which way will draw you an audience. You don't have personal discipline. And without discipline, the opposition will use you. You must have discipline. That means you must deal only with your own people. You cannot go and look for the world's approval. And he's looked for the world's approval. And what happens? You got to compromise. It's simple. Anytime, and this has happened to many good men, including Billy Graham. We pray for him. We hope someday he realizes what he's doing, and he apologizes and changes his direction. But until then, the Bible tells us we can't walk with him. It says we cannot walk with a brother who's walking disorderly. He is a brother, but he's walking disorderly. For those who aren't Christians, they may not understand what we're talking about. But the Christians here know what I'm talking about. Okay. We have this League of Just Men. They later changed the name to an organization called the Brotherhood of Communism, in case you didn't catch on what the League of Just Men were. And they made it clear. The first International was formed by Marx in 1863, disbanded in 1876 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we know the Communist Party was here at least 100 years ago. Sorge headed up the American Communist Party at that time, but officially declared itself in 1919 as the American Communist Party USA, CPUSA. The Second International, 1898 up to 1914, the London International, the Third International by Lenin in 1917, officially declared in 1919. It is the Politburo in the Soviet Union. The Fourth International, by the way, the International was soon moved in 1922 to Germany, to Berlin, because it was hard to operate out of Moscow. Though the directions came from Moscow, the actual operation of the Comintern, the Communist International, was under Dimitrov in Moscow or in Berlin. The International split up, or the Spartacus movement. By the way, Spartacus is the name of Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati. The Spartacus movement in Germany is named after Adam Weishaupt. This organization split into the Communist International of Germany, that is the Communist Party of Germany, the Fourth International in 1922, and the National Socialist Deutsches Arbeiter Party, the Nazi Party, in 1922. The two wings split at that time and appeared to fight each other. But most of the members of the Nazi and the Communist Party were members of both. Dual membership was extremely common all the way through the Second World War. The Fourth International was disbanded in 1928 because it wasn't getting anywhere in Europe. They had taken Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria in 1922 or 1919, but those three countries had a counter-revolution and overthrew the communist regimes in 1922. They had the Red Army at Warsaw in 1922, but the German war veterans went over to Warsaw and smashed the Red Army and drove them out of Poland and saved Poland from communism in 1922. These sort of things are kind of removed from your history book, aren't they? A lot of things are removed from your history book. In 1932, they also took the Ukraine, Belarus. And what happened was the communists, which were ready to take all of Europe in 1922, the revolution was already on in Germany. They were defeated in Germany by the war veterans of the First World War. They were defeated in Poland. Bela Kun was overthrown in Hungary. The Romanian Communist Party was overthrown by the schoolboys under Cardinu. And the Bulgarian Communist Party was overthrown, and the communists were in full retreat by 1922. The only nations they held at the end of 1922 was Russia, Belarus, the Ukraine, France, and Czechoslovakia, which was a communist nation till the day Hitler moved into it, and it still was. Interesting, when Hitler moved into Czechoslovakia, the anti-communists who were in jail were not released. When Hitler took over in Romania, the anti-communists who were in jail by the Romanian government were not released. And when the communists took over Romania at the end of the war, the people Hitler had in jail in Romania and in Czechoslovakia still were not released. It seems like the people in jail were the enemy of both of them. Isn't that funny? Read Sturtz's book, Suicide of Europe. In 1883, on the west side of London, some socialites in a very fashionable area of the city created an organization called the Fabian Society, which is going to bring about world Marxist government and the equality and leveling of mankind under a world dictatorship by democratic, gradual means. The Fabian Societies, I remember, I stated, are the British government that was just out of power. I haven't looked the new government up, but under Wilson, are the 40 members of the cabinet of the British government under Harold Wilson. Only 40 were members of the British Fabian Society. And remember, not one of them were from the working class. All of them were from the blue blood class. You see, if I owned the Bank of England and we nationalized the banks in England, I have taken over my competitor. The Bank of England is not a government bank. It is a private bank. Isn't that interesting? The Federal Reserve is not a government bank. The illusion is given in the mythology books that it is. It's interesting that even in the liberal left-wing textbook that I'm now using, Hailstone, I use it because in economics, because it's the greatest thing in order to demythitize things, to let them read it, that you sit there. Even that book is honest enough to say, while the Federal Reserve is not a government-owned or controlled bank, it works for the interest of all Americans. Oh, I got to get back here. I'm still there in 1929. Bernard Baruch sells out in March 1929. In May, the Rockefellers are sold out and said so. July, the Kennedys sold out. The Lehman Brothers are sold out. All the big wheels had cleared the market by the end of July 1929. Then the Federal Reserve started pulling in reserves. They started pulling in credit. They started shrinking the money supply. What happens to the member banks? Now, I'm not saying every banker's in the conspiracy. No, only a very few. The little local bank here is no part of the conspiracy. They got a problem. The reserves are shrunk. They got to call loans, don't they? And they call loans. Told people they had to pay off at the stock. Well, the people had to sell their stock to pay off, didn't they? But when everybody had to sell, and nobody's buying, because no new credit's available, what happens? The price goes down 95%. While people who had signed loans on their homes, their cars, their life insurance, their very lives themselves were wiped out by the millions. But notice, we're told another myth, that everybody lost in the Depression. Now, I believe for everybody who lost, somebody won. I think for every dollar somebody lost, somebody else won. Now, most people lost. That means very few people won. That means, see, most people lost an awful lot. A few people won fantastic quantities of money. Isn't that interesting? Well, you think about it, isn't it? Then we find in 1932, by the way, we had a Fabian socialist named Herbert Hoover as president, who pushed through most of the left-wing socialist acts, though he didn't put any much guns behind it. He set it all up so that's a Freudian slip. So Roosevelt only had to increase the power. He didn't initiate the laws, did he? They were all set up by Herbert Hoover, who was given to us as a right-winger. Herbert Hoover was a Fabian. He was part of the team. But you got to have a bad guy and a good guy in the show, don't you? A black hat and a white hat and a long-gum white hat on a horse, see? Here, Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes president. Before he took office, after elected, his son-in-law, who was his campaign manager, named Curtis Dahl, met a man named Bernard Baruch in Roosevelt's library. And he asked Mr. Baruch, one of the great financiers of the world, what's a good investment? Remember, this is 1932, height of the Depression. Bernard Baruch says, silver, which shocked Curtis Dahl, who was a stockbroker himself. He thought he would give him some company. He said, silver? You can't make money in silver. He said, Bernard Baruch said, I own 5/16 of all the silver in the world. Hey, that's a lot of silver. Do you know what the first act of Roosevelt was as President of the United States? He doubled the price of silver to help out our Western miners. Can you beat that? And who financed this campaign? Bernard Baruch. It cost Bernard Baruch $2 million. What kind of profit do you get on a third of the world's silver? Doubling the price? That's what you call good returns on your investment, isn't it? Well, the other boys were buying gold. They were getting gold at $20.69. See, there's a little picture they don't give you in your mythology books at school. That's a picture of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Which is the Federal Reserve? There isn't 12 banks, there's one. Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Now, up here in the top of the President's office is always a member of the CFR. Now, across the street is another interesting building called Chase Manhattan Bank with David Rockefeller, key man in the CFR. Now, underneath, between these two buildings, is a tunnel. Now, the United States keeps its foreign gold reserves for international monetary gold in the basement of the Federal Reserve. Across the street, the foreign banks keep their gold holdings in the vaults of Chase Manhattan. When gold goes overseas, it doesn't get on a boat and go across the ocean. No, it gets on a hand truck and goes through the tunnel. The basement of Chase Manhattan is overseas. They're in foreign bank vaults. But those vaults are in the basement of Chase Manhattan. When gold is coming into the country, gold flow into our country goes back through the tunnel. Now, gold was going out the tunnel at $20.69. Then the president asked the American people to come in and turn in the gold. And American people, there was no revolution in this country in 1933. The American people voluntarily came down and turned in 95% of their gold because they so loved their nation and knew their president couldn't lie. He was elected. They turned their gold in under the president's promise to return the gold in 90 days. Then he passes a law saying, you're a crook if you ask for your money back, if you ask your gold back. We'll give you some nice paper. Then they give him $20.69 worth of this new pretty paper. Look how nice it folds and how light it is. Easy to carry and easy to print. Now, he changed the price. This gold goes across the street at $20.69. Then he changes the price when they get the money away from the num-nums, the gold, and got it into Schmarter's hands. Then they changed it to $35, and these people make a nice, cool 14,000 millions. Not bad. For a little pickup. I didn't put the cents out here. Not bad. For uplifting the downtrodden, taking care of the poor, is it, huh? That's just one little game. Then they played another game. This is the beauty. It's called the Non-Recovery Act, the NRA. Uh-oh, you're getting suspicious now already. Roosevelt then puts in this beauty. This one is this. Nation's poor. The little children are starving to death, my friends. Now, I'll tell you what we're going to do. You see, the reason why everybody's so poor is prices are too low. We're in a depression. Yeah? So what we're going to do is raise prices. I'm therefore ordering all of the manufacturers to get together with their competitors, break the Sherman Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, and collude in prices and set artificially prices double the market price. That'll get us out of depression. It'll prime the pump. Think. If people can't afford the things at the present prices, and you double the prices, do they buy more or less? If less can be bought, do more or less people work? What does this do? Guarantees depression. Now, why does it do that? With companies not working, they're cheap to buy. And you just sold all this gold for this nice paper, you'd like to pick up stocks at very low prices, wouldn't you? If you started spending that money for stocks, there'd be a recovery, unless you had the NRA. Guarantees no recovery. Notice, Roosevelt, after in office 5 years, May 1938, our nation is the second lowest month in the history on every economic indicator of the United States. The only month exceeding May 1938 was April 1932. The only worst month. And Roosevelt had been in office over 5 years. Called a con game. But they planned to get out of it with a war once they had things bought up the right way. And, well, I'm only giving you a few little pieces of it. The details in here are so fantastic, so astronomical, they're almost beyond belief. I would suggest, if you want to get a real good little detailed look at the Fabian operation, there's a book called Fabian Freeway. It goes through in England and the United States. It goes through Wilson administration, and the New Deal, and the Fair Deal, and the Great Society, and the people in Hull House, and the colleges and the universities, and who's who. It's a real who's who manual, if you want it. It's a gasaroo. To look in the foundations and the tax-free cash, a little pamphlet, and I was going to show you about the bankers, but I sold out of it, so I better not even tell you what that is all about. By the way, over in Leningrad, old St. Petersburg, there is a big museum today. This museum is a museum to atheism. And in this museum, this big building, is a desecration of every religious belief in the most hideous desecrations they can think of. And it's all done in darkness. But off the side is a hall of illumination. And in the hall of illumination, the only Americans who appear are all the presidents of the National Council of Churches. This is in the hall of atheism. And between each one of the exhibits is the God of the Illuminati. Voltaire, his bust, between each display. Reason. That is, man is the highest mind and intellect. We are it. Aren't you proud? Doesn't it make you feel wonderful? An interesting little point I want to bring out here. A while back, when I talked about the missiles, I think of this. I've only been a Christian 3 years. And it's about 4 years ago, before I was a Christian. My brother one day was saying, well, it looks like Russia's going to get to the moon first. And I said, no, the United States will. He said, no, it's Russia. And I said, no, I've been studying a book every night. He said, what is that? You know, he's reading a bunch of books. I said, I'm reading a very interesting book. It's called the Bible. I sat down, I wasn't even Christian, but I've been reading this thing every night. I'd get home and I'd spend 3-4 hours a night in it. And I said, it seems to me that the only place in this Bible that it talks about anything from this earth being out in space is Obadiah 4. Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and only one nation has the eagle today, and it's the United States after the fall of Germany. Russia's the bear, and in the Bible it's the bear. And though they set thy nest amongst the stars, We are putting a nest in the stars. Eagle is a terrestrial animal in space amongst the stars. Thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. I said, what was the name of the limb that landed on the moon? The eagle. I called my brother up, and he said, I hear it, yeah. I said, that is pretty good shooting, huh, for Obadiah. That's pretty good go, isn't it? But thus I'll bring ye down, saith the Lord. I don't think that bringing down is a capsule from the moon. I think that bringing down is this nation who has exalted thyself as the eagle and said, we have conquered space in the universe. And God says, I created the whole thing. And if you take a galaxy and take a look at the distance between the moon and the earth, it's nothing. One of many galaxies, and you say you're pounding your chest, I'll bring you down, saith the Lord. What did, I shouldn't get off into preaching, but I can't help it. What did Marconi say, or not Marconi, but Morse say when, on his first message on the telegraph? What has God wrought? He didn't invent electromagnetism. He didn't invent copper. He didn't conductivity. He didn't invent any of these. They were already here. He only put them together and discovered what God already had. There was a whole different attitude to the guy who stepped out and said, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Move over, God. I'm showing you how it's done, huh, boy? You wonder how God could love us, wouldn't you? Slappy heads we've got. Well, they're pulling the new one right now. The swindle is going on again. Now they're taking all the gold away from your money. You know what they did? 1932, 33. They said, we're going to have back this money, and we're going to support that money with 25% gold behind the money. That is, quote, they stole 75%. I mean, if you want to say it the other way, right? But they didn't say it that way. We guarantee we're reserving 25% gold behind the money we're printing. 1968. Well, you're used to not having any gold anyway. Why give you any gold? See, you can't get it in the first place. You got 25% gold, but you can't have it, so why even have it? So they just did away with all gold. Then they came up with a new game called paper gold. Hey, boy, that's so clever, isn't it? What it's called is repudiation. I'm going to give a prediction. I'll tell you one thing. Our government and the funny farms we go to called schools tell us that inflation is caused by wage price spirals. I'm going to tell you, there can never be a wage price spiral, and never has been one. Why? You can't get a wage raise unless your employer can pay it. 2, your employer can't pay it unless he can get it from the customer. 3, the customer can't pay it unless there's an increase in money supply, and the customer can't do that. Therefore, there's no wage price spiral possible under any consideration, and never has been one. I want to tell you what causes inflation. Increasing the money supply. Period. Second, nothing else can cause inflation. Third, businessmen and labor don't increase the money supply. The banks, the Federal Reserve, and the government do that. Fourth, the blame is put on wage price, businessman, and labor. Fifth, we going to have wage and price control to control the producers in this country, aren't we? To fight inflation created by the robbers. While the robbers press tells us that it's the producers who caused it. And we must control the producers. I want to tell you something. When the federal government borrows money, I'll show you what happens. This is too high economics here, really, for anything but a graduate course. So if you'll go on a graduate course with me, I will give you a little something about money. When the federal government borrows money, it writes bonds and gives them to the Federal Reserve or to the banks, mainly. And the banks give to the government a checking account. The government spends the checking account by giving it to people, and people deposit the checking accounts back in the banks. Now, what does this mean? There's an increase in pieces of paper called bonds held by the banks, and increases in checking accounts, which is called money. Money is defined as coin, currency, and demand deposits, checking accounts. Okay? Now, the money was created out of thin air. What is the result of all this? One, more money, and two, debt of the people to a private clique, which means interest payments forever. How is this created? By government deficits. Now, if we weren't helping out private clique, the government could print the money themselves, couldn't they? But there would be no interest payments to private people. Why set up a private Federal Reserve? So that the government can give bonds to a private club in return for the checking account, so interest payments will be paid forever to the private club. Why not have the government print the money? There would be no interest payments. Oh, no. That wouldn't be there would be no reason for the debt. The reason for debt is to have interest payments. How else you take the money legally away from the people in taxes and turn it over to the clubhouse? Clean, legal, up and up. Creators of the currency. Respectable. Citizen of the world. Humanitarian. Foundation owner. Supporter of education. Humanitarian. You know, it's nothing wondering how we worship constantly the biggest thieves. When a man has big honor, watch out. A man that this world honors is a thief. The Bible tells us that. A true man of God is never honored in the world's circles. Think of that one for a little bit. Anyway, we have a nice little interesting thing here. They have all sorts of revolutionary ideas. We have here integrated, kill everybody. Religious, segregated, kill all whites, regardless of what their political concern is. Religious, but not Christian. We got youthful killing. SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown, those great government employees. We have Congress of Racial Equality, founded by a white man that does not allow white membership anymore. The Congress of Racial Equality does not allow any equality in their organization. This thing is the two-edged sword of the civil rights movement, according to James Farmer, who was the guiding light of it. He said, we are more violent than the violence. We are the center of the violence movement of the United States. And it was the Corps that conducted the riots in 1967 across this country, and is the man Nixon appointed to be Undersecretary of Health, Education, and Welfare to pass out the poverty money. That great right-wing extremist. We have, you're religious and violent, but you want to be non-violently violent? SLICS, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You go out and march and get violence, but you don't throw the first punch. And that's Christian. We have the NAACP, founded all by white Reds. No blacks, no non-Reds in the founding board. The first black they got was a black Red named W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, they say today, was not a Red, but one time he held a press conference for 30 minutes, and he espoused the virtues of Marxism and showed the press his Communist Party card, which almost makes him a communist in my book. In 1910, we had the ACLU, or its predecessor. It actually took on that name in 1920, the American Civil Liberties Union, which defends communists, but it is a Fabian. It's a socialist organization. We have the Council of Foreign Relations, made up of the big wheels. And this includes the presidents of the biggest companies, the presidents of the biggest universities. People like Kissinger is the control man. He's the president of the United States today. Nixon is not the president of the United States, in fact, only in name. Kissinger is president. Roosevelt was never president. First it was Felix Frankfurter, one of the founders of the Fabian Society in the United States called the Intercollegiate Socialist Society in 1905, along with John Dewey, Walter Lippmann, Upton Sinclair, and Jack London, who was the first president of this little club. It changed its name for the Intercollegiate Socialist Society after Stalin or Lenin was opening the firing squads. They changed it to the League of Marxism, the League of Industrial Democracy, which is another term for Marxism, the workers seizing the plants. They have now, their spokesman operation is called the Americans for Democratic Action, the ADA, founded in 1947 at Willard Hotel with Hubert Horatio Humphrey and a bunch of the other boys, Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, they all were there. And this is the lobby group of the LID. They also have a sub-organization called the Student League of Industrial Democracy, which is action arm is the SDS, which is not a communist organization, I want to tell you. It's a Fabian socialist organization founded by the League of Industrial Democracy, made up of the big wheels, not of the little people. This is of the elite in our government and in our society. The SDS has now been spun off and is supposedly independent. That is, the LID decided it was too hot a potato to have attached, so they've now disassociated themselves from their own creation, the SDS. Interesting that we have Council of Foreign Relations membership in all the board of directors of these foundations, and this in the order of size of the world. We have LID, League of Marxism, on these boards. We have in the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, for example, the first president of that little organization was a man named Alger Hiss. We had right-winger Walter Reuther, who, of course, is against the big wheels and for the little guy. Also, it's interesting that the head organization in the poverty drive, that is the final real drive of the revolutionary movement, was a man named Walter Reuther. But his organization to overthrow the rich and gave it to the poor was totally financed at its beginning and inception by an organization called the Ford Foundation. Now, here's the Ford Foundation financing Walter Reuther, supposedly the arch enemy, to overthrow the rich and give it to the poor. Ding-a-ling, something goes a little wrong in my head, see? I'm suspicious about this. I find Ford grants going to Urban League, NAACP, CORE, SLIC, and we see, and to the, of course, the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty, which is now called a Community Council for, what is it? I got the Ford Foundation press release on that. They've changed it, and the name has been changed. It's now the CCC, whatever that happens to be. They got so many names I can't keep track of them anymore. Anyway, oh my gosh, I never did tell you about this peace deal. The conclusion, let me just step this back in. On this possibility of peace, this study in the think tank that they run with these experts, the conclusion was this: war could not be run. That's what I remember I missed with the Nazi thing. War couldn't be run stupidly like the Second World War. Why? It upset the economy and everything. It was too big at one time with too much of it. War, like all other things, must be controlled. That is, we got to control the money supply to control unemployment and control the economy and control society. We have to control these different things. That is, we got to be able to increase and decrease everything. War, to be properly fought, should be budgeted. That is, we should plan the number of deaths per year. We should plan the draft per year in advance. We should control the amount of action and how many supplies are blown up each year. We should be able to increase and decrease the war as needed, to increase and decrease the debt, to increase and decrease the fiscal policy of the government, to dovetail into our monetary policy, to dove into our social policy, and the necessity in order to manipulate and control our economy and stabilize our society. War is needed, but needed only in limited quantities on predetermined and planned amounts. This means that war no longer can be fought to win. War, the best kind of war, is a war that never is over, that continues forever, and can be increased and decreased, as you just tell the people we're escalating or de-escalating, pulling out, or unilaterally pulling out, then we have to go in here, then we go out of there, then we're going to bomb and not bomb. And war, to be properly done, we should budget it, everything. The people get a little hawkish, give them a little bloodshed. They get a little dovish, we can turn on the dovish and hawkish, we'll increase and decrease the war and manipulate people by the most powerful manipulator of all, as Shakespeare said 400 years ago in King Henry IV. Foreign war. But war should not be just fought all out. Wars have to be limited so that they can be controlled. Do you see something like that happening? After all, if you're going to live in a planned society, you've got to have a planner. And the planner must have the power to make his plan come out. Otherwise, there's no reason of having a plan. And if he's going to make his plan come out, he must be planning to have people do what they wouldn't do. For if they would do it anyway, you wouldn't need the plan. Plan is to get people to do what they wouldn't do. Therefore, if you're going to get people to do what they wouldn't do, you must have the power to force them. A planned economy, by definition, must be a police state. Think of that for a minute. You cannot have a plan without a police state. I see these people, which I consider the people with money, associating with, financing with, and directing these people. These people say they're going to take it away from these people. These people finance those people. I once learned that the man who pays is the employer and the man who receives is the employee. I don't see the left wing giving money to the big foundations. I see the big foundations giving money to the left wing. That tells me the left wing works for the big guys. I didn't read that in a magazine. I didn't get that in school. I figured that out with my own wee little brain. And some help. See? And it makes sense to me. We see an organization founded in 1967 in Chicago, in the Willard, not in the Willard Hotel, but in whatever it is, the big one there, Palmer House, Parker House, whatever it is, called the National Committee, it's really a little different name than that, on New Politics, because they set up the New Politics Party. This was the military and political wing, a movement of combining of the peace organization, Slick and Snick representatives, the poverty organization, and the SANE organization. Back in 1965, 2 years before, we saw in the World Marshals Review the need to combine these three into an anti-monopoly coalition, a proletarian drive. Here we find the three, a military and political movement. Here we find an organization in 1967 called the New Politics Committee, forming an organization to have combine the Peacenik, that's SANE, CCAP, Slick and Stick, that's the civil rights, and official delegation of the Communist Party. Very unusual. Usually it comes under another name. Official delegation of the Communist Party USA. Money was raised by Robert Kennedy from very wealthy people, including the Post fortune, the Post cereals and so forth, to finance this little thing. The big millionaires were there running, watching over the show, as the num-nums and the riot leaders were all down there setting up their little organization, see? Now, you ever think of something, when they have these marches and the people traveling and they go out of the colleges and somebody pays their bus fare and plane fare, pays their hotel bills, these kids aren't paying it. Oh no, everything's paid for. Do they ever stop and think of who? I've talked to these people and they say, yeah, we've thought of that, but it's a great show, you know? But that kind of bothers them. Who's picking the tab up? Isn't that interesting? They're not picking it up. So anyway, here they set up a political party. I'm walking past a TV set one day in 1968 in June, and here's a guy saying, we must combine the peace, the civil rights, and the poverty movement into a new politics movement. That's right out of the party manual. I walk back and take a look at the boob tube. There's Gene McCarthy. He's reading the script, isn't he? Okay. Right after the nomination, they said, Senator McCarthy, what are you going to do now? Well, some people are discussing maybe a fourth party movement. What would you call your party, Senator? Well, we haven't even given it a thought of it. Well, we have something maybe like the New Politics Party. New Politics Party was already on the ballot in Michigan. It took 100,000 signatures in April 1968, 3 months before, to put it on the ballot. And he's just inventing it on the floor. Oh, no. Click, click, see? It tells me, now, you got to know the game. See, when you know the language, then you can find out who's who. It's like everything else. Anyway, here we have the combination for the drive and coordination of the three, just as called in 1965. And it has to be switched over to the poverty drive, and that means Martin Luther King, you got to go. By the way, who are they going to nominate for president in the party? Their nominee, which they went there to nominate, but the thing turned into be a kind of a racial battle, as the Negroes found they were outvoted, and they wanted to have not one man, one vote, but they wanted to have the Negro votes equal to white votes, regardless of how many were there. And the whites were fighting for one man, one vote, and they got down into a complete split caucus, and the whole thing turned into a rumble. But outside of that, they did get the thing launched, and before the rumble started, and then the Communist Party said there will not be any nominations, the nominee for president was Martin Luther King, and Vice President Dr. Benjamin Spock. Notice the one who was not in there is the real leader of the group, Walter Reuther, who said, I dream of three things: presidency of the UAW, presidency of the Local 600, presidency of the United Auto Workers, and presidency of the United States. He planned to be one of the members of the triumvirate, the troika that was to govern the United States when they take over. That was his dream. And his dream got lost on an instrument approach at Pellston Airport in Michigan. Now, all of this, I kind of feel that the connection between the Carney, Rockefeller, Ford group, this is General Motors, Alfred P. Sloan, DuPont's mining operation, These people keep financing the left. They pour money into schools that are the most left wing. In fact, they don't produce any money at Bob Jones University. We teach competitive capitalistic enterprise. You don't find the monopolists putting any money into our school of business. We turn out students who receive more money because they are dependable, disciplined. We teach integrity. We teach morality. And you know what? They're employable. People come all over the country to hire our graduates for a funny reason. Our graduates receive more money and think, why? We're getting to be a monopoly. We're getting practically no competition in our business. We keep praying for more competition, but we don't get much. I'd like to have a few friends out there. It's getting kind of lonely. Anyway, here we have this whole revolution, and this is only a con game. Question, what do we do about this? First, I think you can recognize that there's another level up here in this chart I didn't have. Monopolistic capitalism and oligarchy are nothing but the political and the economic sides of the same coin. And republic and competitive capitalism are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have a republic without competitive capitalism. You can't have competitive capitalism without a republic. If you have an oligarchy, you're going to have monopolistic capitalism. If you have monopolistic capitalism, you must have an oligarchy. That is, you must have a government that can give privileges. Now, there's something else. What kind of government did God set up in Israel? Pardon? Theocracy? No. He gave him a king. What kind of government was it? No? Oh, no. No, he didn't. What did he establish? Rule by law. He said, the kings, if you break the law I've given, I'll remove you from your throne. He told you have many wives and many horses, as Solomon did, and I'll remove you, as he did and broke the kingdom, didn't he? He did with Saul. He said, you are a governor as long as you obey the law. You breach the law, and I'll remove you. Hey, that's called a republic. And he gave a constitution on Mount Sinai. He even went further. He said, to make sure the people know what the law is, you must read the law before the people every year. You must gather the congregation, and you, the king, must stand up and read the law that you are subject to. You are not above the law. You are not to make the law. You are to carry out the law. That's a republic. I hadn't thought of that until a while back. Some Bible student brought that out in the middle of my lecture. He says, you think he set up a theocracy? No, he tried that, and the people rejected that, so he gave them a republic. The trouble is, they had Sauls and Solomons in those days, too. Nixons and Johnsons, etc. Man doesn't change much. He hasn't evolved at all. I'm going to tell you, probably the most brilliant writing we know in existence is the oldest writing known to man. What is the oldest writing we have? Pardon? Job. It is earlier than Moses because it's impossible to write a theological discussion that he does without referral to the law, and he doesn't refer to the law. It is the oldest writing that man knows of. Sit down and read the book of Job from any point of view. From poetry, from construction, from theology, from logic, from any position. And you'll find it one of the most brilliant works. I defy man today to beat it. We go back and take a look at 500 BC and take a look at the men of Athens, of the minds and the writings of that time, and find out whether man is any smarter today. We're doing all the stupid things that they talked about then without change. The preacher said, there's nothing new under the sun. All is vanity, vanity. We talk about all things new and changed. No, and that's what the preacher said, didn't he? All things are new and changed, yet always remain the same. There is nothing new under the sun. All is vanity. The real thing under the sun is this. You're on the way of dying. I am too. If life has any purpose and meaning here, it's because we are for something that's worth being for. and against something that's worth being against. People say you're negative. I'm not negative. I cannot be for morality without being against immorality. I cannot be for liberty without being against slavery. I cannot be against communism without being for individual liberty. I cannot be against anything without being for its opposite. Every time I'm against something, I'm for its opposite. When I'm for something, I'm against its opposite. You can have no more negatives than positives. There is no way to be negative in this universe, because whatever you're against, you're for its opposite. The question is, what are you against and what are you for? There are a lot of people who are trying to be against nothing. That means they're for nothing. There are a lot of people who are trying to live a life being nothing. You fly over this world, and I'm a pilot. At 5,000 feet, you see these little itty-bitty little cracker boxes down there that people sweat their life away for, and it becomes their God. Poor, pitiful souls. You fly over New York City at 8,000 feet, and it looks like some kid was playing on the beach, and the water is going to come and wash it away. You fly over this nation that they talk about being so populated, and you don't find many people. They tell me that when you get up, even at the lowest level, that a satellite rotates, our satellites in orbit, that with the naked eye you cannot even distinguish the human being has ever been on the face of this earth. And yet man wants to thump his whole chest. What you and I are physically and nothing. We're going to pass away. What is important is what we stand for and what we are spiritually. That's universal. That's everything. You're nobody if you're a little cracker box and you're not standing and in a battle. What do I want to be in this world? I'll tell you what I want to be. I want to be in the biggest fight I can find, and I'm in it. And that's the fun. To the communists and to the conspirator, the thrill is not in winning. The thrill is in the fight. They want to pull off the biggest con game in old times, and they're getting a kick out of it. And I think that they've gone so far that the odds are real strong against this, that the real kick is out of opposing them. I have more fun every day when I oppose these people and so forth, and watching the fact of how pitiful their answers are, how they don't want to debate with you, how they don't want you to discuss things, and how they haven't got answers. I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for the kids who are out there looking for answers and are given nothing at these schools but a bunch of garbage. I feel sorry for these kids. If you take the average hippie, what is he? He's looking for answers. He's looking for what's right, and everywhere he turns he gets nothing but phony stuff, and he knows it's phony. I had a Birch Society section leader when I was coordinator of the Birch Society up in Michigan. This guy one day, he goes over to answer one of these call slips. You know, somebody sent in and wanted to be called on, and here's a house full of hippies. And he goes up to the door, and he rings the bell, and I mean, this is way out, you know, and this guy's just a little fella, a little guy, and he's standing there, and they are laughing. They said, boy, and he says, I don't think it's funny. I took my Friday evening off, away from my family, drove across town, and you just did this as a joke. Can't you take a joke, mister? No, I'm mad. Well, what are you going to do about it? I'll tell you what I'm going to do, he says. I'm going to come in and show you my film strips. And they looked at him and they said, you mean you'd come in here? A whole pile of these gorillas in there? And he said, if somebody's going to watch my film strips, I'm going to show them. I said, come on in, we got nothing to do. So he goes in there and he turns on the film strips, beep, click, beep, click, beep, click. You know, he got a whole sack of these things. 3 in the morning, he's finishing up his film strips. Beep, click, beep, click. He gets there and he said, okay, fellas, what do you think? And the leader of the group says, well, we know we've been conned by somebody. We just hadn't figured out who. I mean, the thing's got to be a joke. You know? The thing is, nobody's giving him any answers. He's getting it not down that liberal church with a Preaching Life magazine. He's not getting it over there at that school where they're talking about coming out of amoeba and ooze. They're not talking about when they're talking about there's no hereafter, nothing else, there's no purpose in life. Now when they're telling them there's nothing to know, there's nothing to stand for, there's no truth, you never know when you're right or wrong. He gets down and he says, oh, to heck with it. Give me something in my arm to put me somewhere else. This world is crazy. These kids are yelling help. They're out there yelling help, and what happens? We get people going out to help them, trying to look like them. And they look and they say, you need help. I need help. And here we get Campus Crusade going out there trying to talk to them on our own level by acting and playing the same music, dressing the same way, acting the same way. And they say, man, you're not going to take me anywhere. I'm already where you are. I need something else. Give me something different. And that's what they're looking for. I want to tell you why the conservative movement is the fastest growing movement that's sweeping this country today. Because it's got answers and they're tired of not having any. You tell me everything's relative and there's no absolutes. What you're saying, there are no answers, and don't ask me about any because I don't know them either. You know why they don't like Birchers? Because they seem to have answers, and you're not supposed to have answers nowadays. Do you know why they don't like fundamentalists? Because fundamentalists keep saying it's this way and not that way. You're not supposed to have answers. You're supposed to say, well, it maybe it's gray in between or this and that. Well, we're not sure. Maybe it could be and something or else. We've got to qualify, wash down, and give equal time to our enemy. We must come to common ground. We must have a meeting of the mind. We cannot be dogmatic. We cannot stand what we believe and say, I believe this is true and I stand. Here I stand. You're nobody in this world until you've got a place that you believe and will stand up for and are willing to die for. This is the difference between robots and men. This is the difference. And you know, I want to tell you, until something's more important than your car payments, and something's more important than the rose garden in your life, you're going to have a very miserable life. There are more important things. And I don't sit around gloomy, worrying about the outcome. That's not important. My important is the position I have in the battle, the stand I am taking, and there is the reward. And if that position is right and it has influence, then I just praise the Lord for the opportunity. I want to thank you very much for your time. Those here who do not know the Lord Jesus Christ as their Savior, may I invite you to Pastor Ashbrook's church. I don't want to compete against the others. If you would like to hear me preach tomorrow, and if you don't, you want to hear somebody else, there's some very good preachers here today who would like to invite you to their churches. Because there's another level. Oligarchy is Satan's form, who says that you must have men rule you. And republic is the Lord's. And only people who recognize God's sovereignty can live in a republic, because then they'll accept God's rules and don't need the rules of a state. If you reject God's rules, you have to have rules to live by. You'll have to turn to the state to do it. Otherwise, you're going to live in savagery. And man can't take that either. You don't have much choice. Thank you again.